So wouldn't it be wonderful if this giant book of information would kind of fall out of the sky to tell us how to do that? Right? Just to kind of be a book that kind of falls into our laps that explains, what the secret is about how the universe works. Just like a big instruction manual, how to interact with life in such a way that everything would make sense. I personally would just love for that book to kind of just plop down into my life. And I don't know about you, but I spent the first 37 years of my life kind of stumbling along, creating a whole lot of messes around me, to be quite honest. I couldn't see the connections or the patterns to understand my role in the whole thing, right? It seemed like my crazy life was just happening to me, and nothing was helping me change any of it. I wanted it to change, but I didn't know how to make it change. But in 2002, I discovered a new way of looking at life that changed everything. Because 17 years ago, I walked in to a Center for Spiritual Growth for the first time out in Seattle, Washington. And I started studying this philosophy called the science of mind. And suddenly I just had like light bulbs of understanding going off in my brain, and I started having these clearer ideas of how to change and have a better life. I was able to use the information that I found to improve my life so dramatically that I dedicated myself to really learning this philosophy and having a ministry to help other people figure out how to use this stuff to change their own lives. And here we are. And that's what we're all here together for. I'm trying to help you and help myself continue to use these principles in order to have a better life this beautiful, fine Sunday morning here in Tampa Bay. And every January, all the Centers for Spiritual Living around the world take the time to make sure that these basic foundational pieces of the philosophy are shared by teaching the first 4 chapters of the textbook, the Science of Mind textbook. And this further illustrates Cheryl's point that this thing called you is such a better option to get rid of. No, I love this book, and it's also very dog-eared and marked up. Throughout the year, our messages kind of vary from Sunday to Sunday, depending on what's going on in the minister's heart, or in what's happening in the world, or what might be needed in the community. But in January, we really do take the time to get back to basics and make sure that we teach these first few principles. So last week, I taught from the first chapter of our textbook, and I introduced the first concept called the thing itself. That was Ernest Holmes, and Ernest Holmes is the one who wrote this philosophy. That was his reference word for God. It was one of the things that he called God, the thing itself, the universal power that is called by many, many names. He called it the thing itself. He called it lots of things, but in the first chapter, that's what he called it. That life force that he called the thing itself is the basic building block of everything in the universe, everything we can see and that we can't see. And the nature of the thing itself. What is its nature? Its nature is beauty. It is order. It is balance. It's perfection. It's harmony. It's joy, peace, love. It is the ideal. Matter of fact, when you look at the world of nature, you can see the thing itself on display. You can see that beauty, that order, the balance. You can see it. Sometimes when you get human beings into the mix, man, it's a little bit harder to see, isn't it? Right? It's a little harder to remember that it's there, but it is always there. And since it is in everything, it's in me and you and every other human being. Every other human being, even that one that you just thought, no, it can't be. Even that one. And since it is the core of who we are, at our truest self, we have the same basic nature of the thing itself. We have at our core beauty and joy and harmony and intelligence and peace and love. That is our true nature. But most of us, from moment to moment, we might not be living a life that looks like that. We might not be living a life that you can describe it using those words. If we are God beings infused with the thing itself, why are not we having an easier time of things? And that question brings us to our topic today. Because this week, I'm going to turn the page and look at the second chapter, the way it works. By building on what we learned last week, we're going to figure out the way it works. So the thing itself is the life force within us. It breathes us. It expresses through us. Each of us is given a measure of the energy of life. And we get to choose how we use that life energy and how we direct that life energy. And we're using and directing the creative energy of life whether we know we're using it or not. And whether or not we even understand that we have a creative power within us. We're still using it. The thing is that most of us are not even aware that we're actively involved in the creation of our experiences. We have no idea that we're using anything. But we are. But we are. We are always directing the energy creatively because we are constantly communicating with the thing itself within us. And we are constantly expressing our free will. When we say we have free will, that means that everything is not predestined and predetermined. We get to decide. We're constantly at choice. And through those choices, we are constantly communicating with the thing itself. And we do all of this communicating with the thing itself with our thoughts, with our spoken words, with our reactions, with our emotions, with our choices. That's how we're communicating. The textbook says it like this: the life which we live is universal life expressing through us, else how could we live? Our thought and emotion is the use we make, consciously or unconsciously, of this original creative thing that is the cause of everything. Let me say that again. Our thought and emotion is the use we make of this creative thing that causes everything. Our thought and emotion. If our thought and emotion is how we use the thing itself, we must understand that it is our thought and emotions that are directing the life energy around us. And the universe matches it. Okay? So we have complete free will to think and feel whatever we decide to think and feel. But we must remember that those thoughts and feelings are directing the energy of life moment by moment by moment. It's waiting to know what it is that we choose. The textbook says we are thinking, willing, knowing, conscious centers of life. So you're almost like a little thought factory, okay? We are surrounded by, immersed in, and there is flowing through us a creative something. Call it whatever you want to call it. He says, call it whatever you will. The sum total of all thought, will, purpose, and belief creates a tendency in this law that causes it to react to us according to the sum total of that belief. So what he's saying is that our lives and our relationships and our circumstances are evidence of what we've been thinking and feeling. Good, bad, or otherwise, right? And that leads us to our teaching that if you want to change your life, you have to change your thoughts, feelings, and belief. We shorten that to change your thinking, change your life, right? And I think it helps us to consider the world around us like a giant mirror that shows us our beliefs, that shows us what we've been thinking and believing, both individually and collectively. Let me say that. Actually, it shows us the tendency of our beliefs and thoughts, both individually and collectively. See, remember that we teach that you co-create your life. But what is creating with you? Well, the thing itself is creating with you and working with that. But also we're co-creating with each other. So not only do you have individual responsibility for your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, your beliefs, your choices, your reactions, but you have collective responsibility in the sense of oneness, that what you're putting out into the world is being experienced by those around you. So if you tend to think, remember the tendency of thought, so if you tend to think that the glass is half full, guess what? Your glass will more often than not feel half full. If you tend to think of abundance, you will tend to have experiences that reflect that thinking, right? If you tend to be forgiving and generous, you'll experience forgiving and generous and patient people more often than not. If you tend to be judgmental and cynical and critical, guess what? You're going to find lots of ways to use those skills. Lots of opportunity to exercise those thought muscles, right? So, we frequently use the analogy of a farmer and a seed when we teach these basic spiritual principles of how the universe works, because it's simple. That analogy is simple, and it just illustrates a way of that all of us are familiar with creating. And Holmes used it too. And I asked Randy to share this next quote on the social media, so you might have seen it this week. It says, "The gardener goes forth in faith to sow his seeds," or her seeds for that matter. "He or she has learned that as he sows, so shall he reap, that the law works the same for all alike." The law works the same no matter who that farmer is. We're each individual farmers, and we're constantly throwing seeds onto the ground. Constantly. But what are the seeds? The seeds are our thoughts. The seeds are our words and our emotional reactions and our choices. And before we awaken to the knowledge of our power, we're just casually stringing all kinds of seeds all over the place, right? We say whatever we want to say, we think whatever we want to think. That's what I was doing when I had that mess of a life, right? I was just thinking whatever came to mind. All right, there we go. In our unconsciousness, we think we want wealth, but we're just constantly talking about lack and poverty and what we don't have, right? We worry about being poor, or some people plan for being poor, right? We're planting one tiny seed of a thought of wealth, but we're sowing a whole field of lack and limitation. Or in our consciousness, we say, I want love. I want love and connection. That's what I want. But after we finish that thought, almost the very next thought, if there's a but that says, but all the good ones are taken. And good Lord, I just don't know that I can do that. And we talk about our loneliness, or how much we don't have, what other people have. And we criticize everyone we see and laugh at other people's failures. And we declare that the one who mistreated us in the past was that good one that got away. And we kind of romanticize it. So we're planting one seed of this is what I want, but then we talk about what we don't have, and way more. And then guess what? The thing itself simply says, okay, and starts to grow. The circumstances and situations and relationships around you that support what you're thinking and saying, what your thoughts and your choices are. So there's another example, a bigger example. If you ask 10,000 people around the world, what do you wish for? Somewhere at the top of the list, pretty quickly, they're going to say world peace, aren't they? I mean, almost everybody will eventually say that. But the vast majority of those same people are not carriers of world peace in their hearts. The majority of us harbor fears or distaste for people unlike ourselves. The majority of people would not live comfortably in most neighborhoods in their own city, much less in other places. Heck, most people don't even travel to countries other than their own. Some people never even get out of their own home state. They're so fearful of other people that are different from them. In our current collective consciousness of fear, we're a long way from world peace. But here's what we have the power to do. We have the power to sow those seeds of world peace in our own hearts and our own lives, and that is our responsibility. This thing itself can only grow the seeds we are planting. The soil cannot argue with the farmer and say, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want to plant those potatoes again? I thought you said you wanted watermelon this time." No, the soil does not argue. The thing itself does not argue. The thing itself will not remind you of what you were praying for last week. It just says, okay, here we go. You get to plant what you want to plant. As a human race, we get to plant what we want to plant. That is our free will. The thing itself just says, okay. So let me touch for just a minute on the power of emotions. Emotional attachment to a thought or belief is kind of like extra fertilizer. If you attach joy to a thought, deep down fervent joy, that is a powerfully creative thought. Powerfully creative. Or if your thought is just racked with pain and fear, that is a powerfully creative thought. And I think it's because when we have an emotional attachment to a thought, we just keep thinking about it. If it's a joyful thought, we just start daydreaming about it and imagining it happening, and you just kind of spend more time and feel the emotion of it. We're kind of emotional junkies, aren't we? We want to feel what we want to feel. We kind of ruminate about it. But if it's a negative and scary thing, we lay in bed at night and think about it and worry about it. And then guess what? We dream about it. And then it's in our, we're planting more of that, more and more and more in. So I think emotional attachment to a thought and a belief is even more powerful. So every thought is creative, but emotionally charged thoughts seem to be the very ones we end up kind of walking around a corner and going, whoa, there's the plant, right? I've heard a saying, your worst fear will always come true. I don't know if I believe that as a principle or a truth, but I can see where one would spend a whole lot of time thinking about their worst fear and talking about it and sharing it. Oh, I'm terrified of that. Oh, I'm terrified of that. And then boom, that thing would happen. So what do you do with all this information? You know, especially if you're new to this teaching, what do you do? You know, I can tell you what I did 17 years ago. I truly did feel like this book fell from the sky and it just kind of hit me. It really did make sense to me that everyone and everything was made up of the same energy. That made sense to me. And therefore God was energy, and therefore I was energy too. It made sense to me that if the universe was an energy field, if everything is energy, then it would respond to the pulses of energy that I send out into it. And the way that I send it out is through my interaction of my thoughts. Those are energy impulses going out. That makes sense to me. And if cause and effect is a scientific principle, it makes sense that if I'm causing, then there's going to be an effect. If my thought is my cause, then there's going to be an effect. That makes sense. And I could look at my life and all that was going on and realize that I had some work to do if I was going to make it better. So I started to do two things. First of all, I started to watch my words and my thoughts. What was I thinking and saying? In other words, I had to raise my consciousness, my awareness. I had to be thinking about what I was thinking about, right? If the universe was going to act upon my thoughts and my words, boy, I didn't need to do more than watch them. I needed to change them. I got the idea, change your thinking, change your life. It made sense to me. And number two, I I started testing it out. I started just playing with it and seeing what could I do, what could I change. I wanted to prove this stuff for myself. Whatever word stuff is, I wanted to prove it. So one of the little experiments that a minister did for me, and you can play along right now if you want to. He asked the congregation one Sunday to do this one. So right now, I want you to think of something absolutely random. Think of something random, something you do not see in your everyday life, like an object. Think of an object you don't see in your everyday life. So I had a couple of friends with me at this service, and we decided we would share our experiences. So one of my friends thought of a parrot. She doesn't have parrots in her life, so parrots was her object. The other friend decided hot air balloons was going to be her object. And smarty pants that I am, I chose quarters in strange places. And some of you have been in class, you might have heard this story, right? So those were our three things. And so as you think about your random thing, go ahead. And now imagine an experience that you've had with that. Like sometime when you've seen one of those things that you've thought of, right? Picture it in your mind and try to imagine an experience you had with your random thing. And then we were to go out in the world and start looking for them. Start looking for them. See if the universe would respond. See if the thing itself would allow the universe to kind of plop it into our experience. Fully understanding that this spiritual principle works, and we would see our random things. So I can't remember all the examples, but I'll share a few with you. I remember my parrot friend, that very week, a National Geographic magazine was delivered to her front porch with this beautiful, colorful parrot on the front cover. And immediately following church, we walked out to our car, and my friend Kim and I were gonna go to lunch. And we went to lunch, and we went to a kind of place like Applebee's or somewhere like that, where they have lots of art. And the booth they sat us down in had a huge poster of a hot air balloon. In the booth we had at lunch that day. Right? And so I was looking for quarters in strange places. So as we're driving down the highway that day, there is a huge billboard with a ginormous quarter. And it said, like, call someone who cares. I think it was like a plumbing billboard. I was like, whoa, okay. And then when I got home after the hot air balloon restaurant experience, when I got home, my daughter Kelsey, who was about 9 or 10 at the time, was sitting at her desk playing a game on her computer or whatever. And I walked up to her to kiss her, and there on the bulletin board next to her head, she had tacked up a quarter. And I was like, Kelsey, where did you put that quarter up there? She said, I don't know, a long time ago, right? So, I'm not kidding. I also found a quarter one time balanced up on the wall of a toilet stall. There's a little quarter like, is that a quart? It's crazy. So the universe absolutely responds to our thoughts. It just simply does. And I invite you to prove it to yourself. Don't take my word for it. And I know if you've been around here for any amount of time, you probably have stories you could share too, where you have thought about something or placed a seed or planted a seed and watched it grow into your life. We can all look back at our own lives too and see where we've done that, used the principle, not even knowing we were doing it, but we've used it to create something. See, once I learned that I could manifest quarters and hot air balloons and parrots, which were not intrinsically useful to me, I began to work with the thing itself and spiritual laws to draw into myself better and better things, more peacefulness, a wonderful life partner that became my wife, you know, abundance of every kind, solutions to everything. And I use it every day. Now, when I need a solution, I start planting seeds. Seeds of possibility. Seeds of the very quality that I need. Abundance or joy or peace or love or patience, harmony. I I work to shift my thinking away from judgment and fear and lack and limitation and problems and illness, and just turn them away. Instead, thinking of acceptance and love and abundance and possibility and solutions and wholeness and helpfulness. But it takes practice and it takes discipline. Because it's easier to just willy-nilly think whatever you want to think. It's easier. But you get a mess when you do that. So now you know about the thing itself and you know about how it works. So next week, we're going to turn to another, we're actually going to do 2 chapters next week since David Goldberg's coming at the end of the month. We're going to squeeze 2 of them into one. We're going to talk about what it does and more about how to use it. But for now, remember this. Be mindful of your words, for they are creating your reality. And so it is.